I like reading. I like writing. I like drawing. I like being alone. No, this is not a personal ad. Instead, these characteristics are often found within the personality trait of introversion. And that's kind of what I would like to talk to you guys today about. Now, why would I want to talk to all of you about introversion? Well, when we better understand what makes another person the way they are, we can make a better connection with that person. And clearly, we as college students are here to make lots of connections, right? I mean, college is essentially networking. So when we learn how to best, I would say, approach a person, we can move forward, collaborate more, and be more effective and efficient in what we want to accomplish. So that's why I'd like to talk to you guys about introversion today. Now, there are three main points that I want to go over. First, let's talk about parasympathetic symptoms. We'll get to it. Second, let's talk about how an introvert processes information. And third, let's talk about how an introvert uses the way that they process information as well as their parasympathetic symptoms to do really well in creative fields. Now first, let's talk about what is an introvert. Now, clearly there's some vagueness about it, but typically introversion is defined as someone who draws energy within. What does that mean? Well, according to Bruce D. Wonder and Chester Cotton in their paper, Relation of Marginality to Extroversion, they write, Isaac defines extroversion as a dimension of individual differences in the desire for and the ability to tolerate external sensory stimulation. Well, that's a bit of a mouthful, but essentially what they're saying is that extroversions have a high tolerance for external stimuli and introverts have sort of a low tolerance for external stimuli. Now, why would that be? Well, we're getting to it. According to David Lester and Diane Berry, in their paper, Automatic Nervous System Balance and Introversion, they write, in a sample of 61 undergraduates, a measure of parasympathetic predominance in the autonomic system was associated with introversion. What does this entail? Well, parasympathetic symptoms state that introverts will salivate more, they have lower blood pressure, they're hungry more often, they tend to have drier skin, and we do find more evidence of this. In Sybil B. Isaac and H.J. Isaac's paper, Salivary Response to Lemon Juice as a Measure of Introversion, they took 50 men and 50 women, put 4 drops of lemon juice on their tongues, and found that an introvert had 0.7 correlation with an increase of salivation. So essentially, what's happening is that an introvert's system is much more sensitive than an extrovert's. And so while an extrovert can go out and be around a lot of people and a lot of people can talk and interact with them and they don't mind, an introvert will be much more sensitive and they can only take so much stimulation before they're overstimulated, they're overwhelmed. And of course, let's say that this is the case, right? You go to a club, there's lots of music, there's lots of sounds, and you're expending all of your energy trying to sort of balance that out. What do? Well, if you're overstimulated, you take a step back and you go and you find a quiet place where you can be alone and you don't have to necessarily be expending all of your energy. Well, when you're alone, what does that mean? Well, what do you have? Well, it's just you and your thoughts. And when you're by yourself and you just have your thoughts, you can sort of think more deeply about that one thought. And this is sort of, we can see how introverts would think differently than extroverts because they do stay with that one thought more, and we find evidence towards this. So the way that they process information is indeed different. We find evidence of this with in Thomas Camero Pre-Musics and Adrian Fernhand's book, Personality and Intellectual Competence, they write, introverts can be expected to outperform extroverts on verbal tests and problem-solving tasks that require insight and reflection. So there's sort of an emphasis on the insight and reflection. An introvert, is off on their own, they're spending time by themselves, and they're thinking through each thing very slowly, very carefully, and it does require insight, and it just becomes second nature to them because they've already spent time alone. Also, when you're with a problem or when you're with your thoughts, more often than not, you sort of develop a different way of problem solving, and we find evidence of that as well in H.G. Isaac's paper, Personality and Problem Solving. Pardon me. They took 19 extroverts and 28 introverts and gave them an untimed test. Now, they didn't find any overall difference in the correct answers. However, at the end, they often found that extroverts would give up or give more incorrect answers because they were getting so bored. They weren't stimulated enough. However, an introvert who is often overstimulated is used to spending time alone and writing out what they need to do and processing those sorts of informations. They will look at a problem and sort of think it through, look forward to see if there's any problems like that might arise, and try to sort of circumvent it rather than just going straight through to be done, which we often find that extroverts do. So what have we talked about? Well, we've talked about how an introvert has a very sort of sensitive system, and because of that sensitivity and the ability to be overstimulated, they often sort of remove themselves from situations. And when they remove themselves from situations, once again, they sort of stay focused and they sort of think a little differently because they think more deeply and more, they develop their thoughts more. Well, this is really, really helpful. Both of these sort of personality traits are really helpful in creative fields. And that kind of makes sense, right? Like if you're sensitive to different colors, lights, sounds, actions, what have you, and you have this ability to sort of think outside the box, it makes sense that you would be really successful in an artistic field. And we do see this in Barbara R. Strelo's and William B. Davidson's paper, Introversion, Extroversion, Tempo, and Guided Imagery. They took a group of extroverts and introverts, and they asked them to produce some mental imagery. And they found that introverts reported much more vivid detail than their extroverted counterparts. And we see this evidenced as well in Malcolm W. Huckabee's paper, Introversion, Extroversion, and Imagery. They asked 111 students, sort of a similar situation. They asked them to produce mental imagery, and they found that introverts, more often than not, would produce much more vivid imagery. And once again, this makes sense, right? Like if you're already sensitive to colors, if you're already sensitive to shapes and sounds and all of this, it makes sense that if anything was out of order and you're sensitive to that, it would really hurt you. So you would want everything to be sort of in balance. And we find that in the field of, like in creative fields, in the fields of arts. And we actually do find evidence, again, that we do find lots of introverts in the artistic field. So Carl Otto Gotts and Karen Gotts wrote a paper called Introversion, Extroversion, and Neuroticism in Gifted and Ungifted Art Students. And what they found was that they took 50 gifted art students and 74 ungifted art students. And they found within both of these factions that there was a much, much higher level of introverts in the 50 gifted students. And then maybe even slightly more telling is that within the gifted students, the 15 most gifted of the art students was found to have the highest level of introversion. So we see introversion in art already happening and in sort of these creative fields. So basically, an introvert is a highly sensitive, easily overstimulated person that has a very sensitive parasympathetic symptoms and system, which means that they can be easily overstimulated, and because of that they often sort of remove themselves from situations so that they can sort of balance that out, not be overstimulated. But while they're alone, they often spend time with their thoughts, which helps them to sort of really deeply think and connect with their thoughts and make sure that you get to like the point that you're trying to make in a very clear, detailed sort of situation. And both this sort of deeper outside the box sort of thinking, as well as their very sensitive nature, allow introverts to be very, very capable in the creative field and very good candidates for artistic endeavors. So next time, if you see someone with these sorts of traits, maybe you'll feel a little more informed as how to interact with them, and you can make a deeper connection that helps you understand them better. Thank you very much.